I'd like to talk about something that nobody likes to talk about.
The caste system that was part of early Jewish life in first century Judea and in general. I am talking about Judea of the Roman period, that is the 1st and 2nd century AD. One might ask, of course there was a caste system. It was Roman rule. There were several Roman social classes. No, I'm talking about Jewish social classes. They were established much earlier. Those were very significant. Even today we have Cohen, Levies and Israel. At the synagogue, they are still part of today. The way we will approach this unpleasant topic is through the story of Rabbi Akiva, son of Joseph a shepherd. It is important to note, though, that during that period, there were 3 versions of Jewish practice. This is called Jewish sectarianism. It is not the same as the class system. The first were the Sadducees, who were the priests and ran the Jerusalem temple. They were generally Hellenized and lived in and around Jerusalem. The second group were the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the early version of rabbinical Judaism practiced today. They were of a more scholarly practice. They lived in the hinterland and Galilee. Furthermore, they believed in the afterlife. The third group were the others, the so-called Jewish Christians, Roman God-fearing folk, Essenes, and small sects. So, who did we leave out? Did we leave out anyone? Oh yes, and how? We left out 70% of the people. The nobodies, also called in Hebrew Am Haaretz, the people of the land. So who were those nobodies? It is a good question. How do we hear about them? They didn't regard themselves as nobodies. They were people, but they didn't write scholarly articles. They didn't write history books. They were not invited to heated arguments about the interpretation of the Jewish scrolls. They were mostly farmers, traders, tanners, laborers, carpenters, people like Simon Peter, a fisherman, Mary Magdalene, Martha, and James. Some of them became Jesus followers. Most of them just lived their quiet, unassuming lives. This is the official Talmudic interpretation of the people of the land. They don't always pay a tithe. They don't always keep themselves clean and pure. They don't use the ritual bath as often as they should. They don't lay pray or tefillin properly. They don't teach their kids Torah properly. You can see where all this leads to. They were a caste of people that no one can eat with, no one can marry into them, and no one regards them as anyone to consider. This was true for hundreds of years, with one exception. Except if they had money. After the destruction of the temple, in the year 70 AD, there was a significant reshuffling of power. The Jewish court, the Sanhedrin, was in charge of all Jewish affairs. It was re-established in Yavne, which was in the lowlands. A wealthy man named Kalba Savua was a prominent financier. Naturally, he was very close to the Jewish governing body, but he was not a scholar. He was from the class that no one spoke of. They only put up with his presence because he had money. It is reasonable to say that by the time Rabbi Akiva was an adult, the Sadducees were no longer a governing factor. The temple and Jerusalem were destroyed, and many of the Sadducees either died in the revolt or migrated. We still meet the Sadducees today in the Jewish name of Cohen, as in priest. Kalba Savua's daughter, Rachel, married Akiva before he became a Torah scholar. Akiva was a shepherd for Kalba Savua. He was too from the non-scholarly class. He penetrated the boundaries to greatness with his keen mind and charisma, no doubt with the support of his wife. Perhaps his connections with his father-in-law helped too. He studied by himself and later formed a large following. He was always mocked and belittled by the official scholars of the Torah. Eventually, he became the most significant interpreter of the Torah of his days. Akiva had many students that followed his path. He never forgot his distaste from the scholarly class that rejected him at first. It is well documented. He was executed around the same years as the Bar Kokhba revolt, 135 AD. About 100 years later, the 6 books of Mishnah, a collection of oral instruction, were compiled. Many of the final arguments and verdicts are attributed to Rabbi Akiva. Akiva belonged to a class of nobodies, which nobody talked about then. We don't talk about them now either. I'm thinking that today, secular Jews have become the new social class of people of the land. I don't really know.